morning, Sally.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay, so let me just do a short bio. I mean, your short, just a short introduction, if you're okay with that. Okay, so today we have with us Sally Yozell. She's a senior fellow and director of the Environmental Security Program at the Stimson Center, which is a research institute in Washington, D.C. Her research examines environmental factors that have the potential to undermine the security of individuals, communities, and nations across the globe. Sally explores how the linkages between environmental degradation and natural resource threats can undermine economic, food, and ecological security. Working with coastal cities and island states, she and her team are building resilience in communities threatened by the climate crisis. She oversees CORVI, the Climate and Ocean Risk Vulnerability Index, a multidimensional decision support tool for leaders who need to make climate smart investments to improve the safety and security of their citizens. CORVI is active in 11 countries. Prior to joining Stimson, Sally served as a senior advisor to former US Secretary of State John Kerry and was the Director of Policy and Deputy Assistant Secretary at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Sally led marine programs at the Nature Conservancy and Battelle Memorial Institute. She holds an MPA from Harvard University. So Sally, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. I think you are on vacation, so thank you for agreeing to take some time to be with us this morning and share the case study for Kingston. And of course, she wants lots of questions at the end, so please go ahead, Sally. Thanks.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Liz. Thanks for that really nice introduction. I have to say, when you mentioned quiz or test, I almost turned off my screen and ran. It just gave me immediate hives. It's been a while since we've been having to take tests. But anyway, I'm so honored to be doing this today for so many reasons, not the least that it was back in 2019 when we started the CORVI process, and Kingston was our first case study, and it was a learning experience. And I recognized some of the names as I was looking through the attendees today. So for those of you who I had the chance to meet many years ago, it's great to see you again. And for the others, it's great to just meet you for the first time. But, we've had quite a journey, and we had a lot of lessons learned from our experience in Kingston that have gone into the CORVI process as it is today. And in fact, we're now up to almost 15 CORVI projects in just 4 or 5 years. So I'm going to talk about CORVI, but I'm also going to talk about several of the other issues that you all have. I was looking at the work you've been doing over the last 4 weeks. I have to admit, I wish I was joining it. It looked like such a great course. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to share my screen. I've got a lot open, so let's see if I can get this to work. Let's see. What happens when the shift screen button goes? Okay. What do you see? Anything?
No, not as yet.
No, nothing.
How's that?
Yes.
Yes, we're seeing it now.
Okay, great. Well, so anyway, just to begin, when we came in 2019, Donna Blake, I don't know if Donna is on, but Donna was very gracious from the Nature Conservancy to provide sort of some of the help and sponsorship and to take a chance on us. And so if Donna, if you're here, many thanks. And if you're not, if someone could please pass that along, I'd be grateful. And secondly, Liz was also very helpful. We didn't know we needed Liz when we started, but about halfway through the project, it was quite clear we needed help from Liz, and she stepped in and really managed to help us finish it off. So with that, let me just give you, I don't know if any of you followed the recent COP27 that took place in Egypt. It was really interesting because it was really the first time that we started to see a change where island states and coastal least developed countries really stepped up and said, our voices need to be heard. For years, the focus has been primarily on climate mitigation, and not to undermine that at all. Clearly, we need to address climate mitigation. But it was for the first time that we heard voices saying climate adaptation, climate resilience needs to be taken seriously, equally. And the reasons for that are very simple. I mean, the UN says that almost something like 2/3 of the global population are going to be living in urban cities by 2050, with coastal cities taking on much of the growth. And, when you think about SIDS, you are the least responsible for climate change, and yet you are taking the brunt of the effects of climate change. Yes, Liz?
Oh, hi, Sally. Just wanted to ask you if you wouldn't mind, what is that thing? Using slideshow.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Sure,
Okay.
yes. Let's see if that works. How's that?
Let me see. It's coming up, showing the next slide.
That's okay. This, wait, the infographic?
Yeah, it's in presenter view.
Okay, what do I need to do?
Go to this, I guess, display settings and just put it in audience view, I guess.
Let me see. I hope I won't. Let me go back. Let's see.
No, just go to the top and look for view, and let's see if slideshow. Rather than, I don't know if that would work. Go to slideshow on your taskbar.
Yeah, I'm trying to get.
Next to animations and before review.
Animations.
To the top where you have file, home, insert, design, transitions, animation.
I see. Hold on, because I have a.
No, just go to slideshow.
Got it.
Yeah. Let's see if it. Click on that, and let's just see from beginning if it works, or from current slide. So the first thing on your left from beginning.
First thing on my left from beginning.
Oh, well. All right, well, just continue.
So what do you all see?
We see the slide. I mean, I don't know if it's a lot bigger, but go ahead.
So what do you see now?
Coastal cities exposed to the climate crisis.
Okay, all right, okay. So, okay, back to what I was saying. Sorry about that. back to what I was saying about COP. So what really happened at COP, is I was saying that, SIDS are the least responsible for the climate crisis, but, bearing the brunt of the issues. And the UN is now saying it'll take something like 300 to 500 billion dollars a year to fill the adaptation gap that's developed. And so it's going to take a lot of climate ambition to get where we need to go. And I think that is why kind of the work that you all have been doing all week is so important. Learning about all the different ways for resilience and building climate resilience in the communities. And I think this slide, if you look at this slide, it really outlines, what is at risk, whether it is you can see that the challenges your nation faces are localized. And that's the problem that we so often hear is, there are national data information, it's regional, it's global, but we really need to understand what is happening in our local communities. What are the localized, detailed issues? When the hurricane hits, when sea levels rise, we have to understand the economic, the social, and the political vulnerabilities. And this infographic really is designed to show that clearly there are increasing temperatures, extreme storms, sea level rise. Those are, affecting the physical infrastructure, the natural environment, and the economic security of residents. And also, these are the compounding threats and challenges that stress the vital ecosystems, which millions of people around the world depend on: fisheries for food and income, and habitats such as mangroves and seagrasses and corals, all that are so important for not just your safety, but for the blue economy, such as tourism. And so, when looking at coastal resilience and climate change, you can't look at just one of these issues. You really have to look at the interconnectedness of all of these issues. You have to consider from land to sea. I mean, in Jamaica, you think about the floods that come down from the Blue Mountains. Well, you have storms coming in from the ocean, and the sea level rising, and the erosion, and the aging infrastructure and the flooding through the city. I mean, all of that is connected. The informal housing. So when you're thinking about how do you build resilience, you can't look at any of these issues in an isolated way. And so that is why we originally developed CORVI. And I'm going to talk a little bit about CORVI now. I'm going to give you sort of a case of how to do a CORVI and why it's so important. And try to think, again, Jamaica was our first case study. Now we've done several, so we've really refined our process. But let me walk through, let me go on to the next slide. Works. As you can see from this slide, CORVI really is designed to focus on economic, financial, and political risks for the reasons I just described. And underneath those three major focus areas, we have 10 specific categories. I won't go through them all. I think hopefully you can see them, but there are 10 risk categories. And then underneath the risk categories, we have, believe it or not, 96, almost 100 specific risk indicators. And we collect information on all of that. And the reason we do it again, and now I'm going to walk you through the process, is because often information doesn't exist. So we have to go in through what I'm going to describe as the CORVI process to get all of that information. And then once we have it, we have a much fuller picture of what is the holistic focus. I mean, what is the holistic issues from land to sea that require focus. So the CORVI process, one of the things, I'm laughing to myself, but Liz will appreciate this, or any of you who we worked with during it. One of the issues when we worked first in, when we first worked in I apologize, I lost my note on this. When we first worked in Jamaica, was we came to town and we were, you know, who's the Stimson Center from Washington, D.C., coming down to Kingston, Jamaica to tell us what to do. That was clearly, yeah, Liz, sorry. Is your hand still up? No. Yes. Okay. That was clearly the message that we kind of received when we arrived. And again, TNC and Donna were very helpful to try to smooth it over. But, you know, one of the first lessons we learned was get government buy-in right at the start. So what we now do in our CORVI methodology is we first do desk research to really understand the issues that we can find that are written about. But then we go down to wherever the city or community is, and we have meetings with the government. We get buy-in from the government right up front before we go through the whole process. If we don't have government buy-in before we start a CORVI process, then it's not really worth conducting a CORVI project there. Because let's be realistic, in the end, who is going to implement the recommendations and change that are needed for change? It's the government. So that was a lesson we clearly learned in Jamaica when we did it. And secondly, you know, not only will that be critical for implementing the recommendations, but it's also critical in the process that we go through, which is engaging the whole community of stakeholders. So as I said, we start with a desk research, and then we come to the community. We develop a very extensive list of stakeholders, both academic, government, business, and NGO. We have a major meeting, our first stakeholder meeting, and we also at that time, we hire either in the government or we bring in a consultant that will work with the government to really be our champion on the ground. And during the stakeholder workshop, we really walk through the CORVI process. We review the big indicator list, the 96 indicators. We sometimes make adjustments to a few of them based on local conditions. And then we describe how the survey works. We give a survey, we do interviews. And while we're there, we hold as many interviews and start the survey process. So, you know, we just really have to make that local connection. And that is what has been very, very clear. So again, as you can see on the slide, we go through the indicators, we conduct structured interviews. And then once the surveys and interviews are complete, the next step is to interpret the final CORVI risk scores. And then we augment this with other sources of information, those interviews. So it's kind of like a triangulation. You know, we have the desk research, and then we have the data from the surveys and the interviews. And we bring all that information together, and we develop the CORVI risk profile that really lays out specifically what are the findings, and I'll go into a little bit of how we do that and what are the recommendations. Move on to the next slide. So actually, that's in the wrong place. Okay, so you will see that when we are developing our risk scores, it's the green to red light sort of system, from low to medium, and this is really based. This is the heart of our assessment, and it's really based on what's called structured expert judgment, and that's a social science technology tool that we use. And I won't go into the details, but there are papers written on it. It's a very robust methodology. And so when we went to Kingston, we really saw that there were a lot of different issues going on. You know, there was a diverse economy that does lower the financial risk. However, from compared to, say, for example, other Caribbean nations, which, you know, are mainly, say, just tourism, like we did Castro's, I think it's 40% based on tourism, but when you add the informal economy, it's up to like 70. But I think you'll recognize some of these slides. You know, there was informal housing that you know affects the infrastructure and the waste management that flows into the city. There was elevated city level flood risk. Again, as you see, from water coming down from the mountain, water, as I mentioned, coming into the ocean. You'll recognize the road out to the airport. And, you know, that is such a mainstay. Obviously, you know, most tourists, you know, many tourists fly into Montego Bay, but obviously a lot still come to Kingston first. So it's important not only for goods and services, but for people moving. And so we had found that many of the mangroves had been removed, for example, around the road, causing flooding. And then obviously the other, you know, Kingston Harbor is so important for shipping. I mean, the whole country gets its shipping through the port, again, right at sea level. So there were a number of issues that we identified. And when we did this, you'll see the map we use. You know, we don't just do Kingston proper. We go and we talk to the community. And what we learned, which many of you know, obviously, is so many of the people who work in Kingston live in Portmore. So it was important to include Portmore in our area of focus. And again, heading up into the mountains as well was very important. So yeah, so that is really where I show you the portal. That is really the focus areas that we saw. And one of the things that again, one of the, you know, the issues that you'll see here are really, I'm sorry, my notes are kind of all over the place. I apologize. The issues we saw, when you look at these are the cumulative issue, you know, high level, medium, high. You'll see that it's ecosystems, in economics and social demographics. But when you look at the 96 different risk indicators, it really, what will pop out are the issues that are the most important. And if you look at our report, which I'm trying to grab, there it is. when you look at our report, what you'll find is the highest areas were many of the issues that you all have been focusing on this week. I mean, ecosystem health, I think, was like the highest for Kingston. Ensuring proper water drainage. We found that coral reefs and seagrass beds were declining and so important. The ability to address flooding, as I said, was, affected by degraded watersheds and fill waste management. And so some of the top, the level of seagrass bed coverage was at 8.3, mangroves coverage was at 7.9, hurricanes very high up there. So these are all the issues that when you look into a CORVI risk profile, it has that very, very specific detailed information. And if you are a decision maker, then you can really look at what are the highest risks that need to be addressed. So again, in Jamaica, it was the ecosystems such as coral reefs, seagrass, and mangroves were at high risks. These risks compounded by extreme weather events. It showed again that Kingston's diverse economy helps, but certain areas like tourism are highly at risk. Again, the unplanned housing and settlements, and some of the poor construction practices lessens Kingston's ability to recover from extreme weather events. And some of the crime, that has been in a few of the neighborhoods, affected some of the social issues. So these were all of the things that we really saw that could potentially increase some of the risk of social instability or vulnerability. And finally, I think the other issue we saw was that climate change was having a negative impact on the agricultural sectors, such as the coffee growing in the Blue Mountains and some of the areas outside of Kingston. So this is why you look at all of this in this very multi-sectoral focused manner. I'm just going to show you quickly a data portal that we have. If for those of you who are researchers, you might find this to be helpful. So if you go on our website, we have a data portal that really outlines all of our CORVI work. We're up to, as I said, by the end of this year, we'll be at 14 different CORVI projects. But you can see on this slide here, all of the different cities that, and then as you can see on this slide, this is, looking at what are the areas that are really at high risk. It goes in, it delves into the 96 different risk indicators, and you can really get a sense, and you can play around with it. Obviously, this one isn't live, but there are a lot of different attributes to it that help you. And then this is my favorite one, which is the comparison. So for example, what we're seeing here is a comparison of risks between Castries, St. Lucia, and Kingston, Jamaica. Rainfall, hurricanes, let's see, this is Kingston on this side, so, oops. Yeah, and it again, it goes through the great detail, and you can compare it to cities across the Caribbean. And we've done a number of CORVIs now in the Caribbean, and have many more coming down the pike. We've done Basseterre, St. Kitts and Nevis. We recently in Barbados. We're going to start working on Aruba this year. So we're really slowly making our way through several different parts of East and West Caribbean. This is where we have been or are currently doing CORVI around the world. So you can see it's everywhere from the Pacific, Kiribati, Fiji, and the Philippines. In fact, I'm going to the Philippines in 2 weeks, to the Caribbean, to East Africa. So it's the variety of funders who have all been supporting it. So in the end of the day, why does a community care? What is the process? Why do they care that we've gone through this intensive process? And really, if you are trying to access funds, I talked about right at the beginning how the amount of funds required to build adaptation and resilience are so huge. And often we find that cities and national governments just don't have that granular level data and information to apply for grants, say from the Jeff or the Adaptation Fund or the World Bank, And so with these now CORVI assessments, what we're finding is they're being used to develop adaptation plans that have more granularity so that they can then go after the big funds needed to build, to develop the projects, to build resilience in the local communities. I know, for example, in Basseterre, St. Kitts and Nevis, they're using it to fill out some of their upcoming applications. They're also, some of the findings are helping them move forward projects that they wanted to do, but now they have the background information to do it, such as a new energy plant in geothermal and a wastewater infrastructure plant that they've solicited funds from a partner showing the CORVI findings. So they really are starting to be used in a way. In East Africa, Mombasa County has used our report, for example, in their adaptation plan that is helping them now seek additional funds. Same in Dar es Salaam and in Chattagram, Bangladesh, they've told us that our findings will help them raise funds. And we understand in Dagupan, Philippines, where we've just finished the report, we have a funder that is going to go after some of the priorities that were outlined. So that is how we're finding our granular level information from land to sea, connecting the issues of climate risk in a more holistic manner is really starting to help communities where we have done these reports and assessments. If you want to learn more, we have two papers that are science papers, one in Frontiers in Sustainable Cities on the methodology, and another one related to the Suva Fiji project. And we can certainly send you information on that. So I know I kind of put a lot of information in front of you in a very short time, a lot of details, but I'll just leave it there and see if there are any questions folks may have.
Are there any questions or comments? And Sally, I think you're sharing your email. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to stop sharing. Where's the button for stop sharing? Stop share. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that. A little all over the place for a Friday morning, but I hope I was able to get across the depth of our work and how it fits in so nicely to the ecosystem adaptation work that you all have been focusing on for the many past many weeks.
Any comments, any questions? Anything that jumped out at you that you'd like to get some additional information on? What I did was actually, I did put the link to the study in the chat. So that is there. You can read at your own time. Any interest as it relates to data? So Howard, your hand is up, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. The risk that were analyzed, the financial risk, the ecological risk, the political risk, and the range of risk, what recommendations were made in order to mitigate these risks?
Yeah, so great question. So one of the recommendations, for example, were a greater coordination among the government, for example. What we found, there was a lot of stovepiping, as there are in most governments, but that there is so much connectivity there. I don't know if it was a result, but you created your what is the ministry you now have? That's housing, urban affairs, environment, and climate, I think are all like that super ministry. That is the kind of coordination that we think is so important. We also think, again, the declining ecosystem health. It's important to build the ecosystems back, particularly along the mangroves that were taken out along the airport roadway. On the pollution coming down, important to address the waste infrastructure from the informal housing and focus on some of those social issues. We recommended that when you look at the downtown area, there's such promise that's not being, that wasn't being taken into account. And, perhaps it's due to the flooding, but we thought that there was a real opportunity for coastal expansion if you bring back mangroves and wetlands around the Kingston Portmore area to support while you're building here, make sure you add those natural ecosystems back into the system to help with drainage and flooding and reduce the flood risk from precipitation, storms, etc. One of the barriers that we've heard a lot about is the lack of data. It was thought that this could be helpful in really providing that kind of coordinated data. And again, on the social vulnerability aspect, it was really, important, again, to make that connection of those communities that are, economically disadvantaged to the ecosystems and to the downtown city area. They're not all siloed. There's this connectivity that really has to be focused on, from freshwater pollution to wastewater infrastructure to flood risks. And the other issue was that was highly raised was the vulnerability associated with youth unemployment. So again, bringing in some of the issues of trying to reduce youth unemployment and make sure that the social crime type issues are also taken into effect. So that was a lot, I just said, but those were the many integrated issues that can help build a broader resilience.
There was a question, Adrian, I'll come to you next, But there was a question in the chat from Carisha. Any additional information on methodology, the structured expert judgment, what are the constraints to applying? What were the constraints, I guess, to applying in Jamaica's context? And how was that addressed?
So structured expert judgment is this, I mean, I don't want to, it's pretty complicated, but basically you go in and you find the best experts you can in the community. And that actually was not a problem in Jamaica. You know, we used UE, many of the folks in the government spoke to us and filled out surveys. But basically, when there's a lack of data, you go in and you have a survey, and these surveys are very extensive. And you have a seed question that you know the answer to. And if the person you're interviewing answers it 100% correct, they get 2 points. If they answer it sort of correct, they get 1 point. If they answer it not at all, then they get tossed out of the survey. So that's the way we pull together the expertise and make sure that when we're talking to these folks, they're real experts in their field. And then, you know, it goes through a whole weighting process that goes through, you know, again, interesting, when we did it initially, we didn't have our portal, which now does everything automated. We had to do it by hand on Excel spreadsheets, but now we have a whole automated process that then takes the information that comes out of the surveys and puts them through a system. I can send Liz a paper, our paper about the methodology, as well as a paper on structured expert judgment, and provide so that she can provide that to all of you.
Thank you. And one more question, Adrian.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the methodology a bit. I heard in your presentation you spoke about buy-in from the government and because the government is going to be the one to implement. But being a community person myself, I know if the underground does not have any buy-in from the community level, government will have a challenge in implementing whatever positive outcomes there are perceived to be in it. So I wanted to find out, based on the methodology used, if there was any integration of community views, community voices, and the impacts that these communities, the insight and the impacts of these communities by ecosystem service loss and environmental adaptation processes, because I think you spoke to quite a bit about the waste issue. I come from a community where the mangroves are still kind of there, but they're being degraded by solid waste. So I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Adrian, that's a great question. So again, we try to bring in as many voices from local communities, civil society, NGOs, academia, industry, and the government. So it's not one, it's all of the voices and information, get surveys, participate in the workshops. And when I talk about the government, I mean it more in the sense that when we have our findings, it's important when we start the process to have government buy-in, because at the end of the day, you know, they can help us with meetings. If they're bought in, they're more likely to implement the recommendations. So when the folks from civil society and industry and academia and the government give us all the input and we come out with the priority areas, then there's a document that, whether it's civil society, can go to government and say, these are the areas that came out of this process. we need your help in implementing some of the recommendations, or the government may do it itself. So it's not, I only highlight the government because, again, when we did it, our very first one in Jamaica, we didn't make sure we had that government buy-in at the beginning. And I think as a result, there's been less implementation possibly of our recommendations than we've found now in other places where we've done that, where we go in and we work with the government and we have their buy-in at the start. It's just a lesson learned that that you all gave us in Jamaica. But I don't know, I mean, maybe you can tell me if any of our recommendations about building resilience in the marine ecosystems, improving urban planning, or addressing some of the social issues have been implemented. Again, I think the super ministry is a good step if it's actually working together under one roof.
Anyone knows if any of the recommendations are being implemented? I could just say that, not for Jamaica, but I know for Barbados, which you did recently for Bridgetown, I know that it has been, it's very much connected with other things that the country is actually focusing on and actually doing. So it complements other activities. I know it has been highlighted in in a report that I saw, that it was highlighted as something that would support them in their thrust to better adapt to a changing climate. So I've seen stuff out of Barbados for sure.
Yeah, Barbados and St. Kitts and Nevis have very much used the recommendations. Even Castries, which was also the second one we did, they used the information to do their roadmap, their economic roadmap for the future. So, we're not expecting someone to take by whole cloth our report and go and do it. It's there as a resource of information, of actions and recommendations, findings, actions, and recommendations. And we just hope they're being used.
All right, one more question because we have to get into our class today. Howard, I see your hand up again, so I'll give you that very last question. Go ahead, Howard.
As you spoke about whether the recommendations were implemented, and just a quick one, when you do your study, could it be part of your study that when you make a recommendation, there is a follow-up to those recommendations or a timeline being given? I know it might be very difficult to put a timeline on your respective stakeholders, but it would be good if that is part of your study. When you make the recommendation, that there is a follow-up to the implementation.
Howard, that is such a great idea. So one of the other things we have added as we've improved our methodology is not just the very beginning of the process where we meet with everyone and we get the whole thing rolling and start the surveys and interviews and stuff. At the end of our process, when we roll out the recommendations, we meet with stakeholders and governments to discuss what we have found and talk about how could this be implemented. We meet with the press. And then, I mean, it's not an immediate, but because we just don't have enough resources, but the goal is to go back to the place where we did these in a 5 to 10 year time frame and do a short assessment. Did they use any of it? Well, we frequently check to see if things are used, but this is a more methodological check back in to see how have things changed. Are they using the findings and recommendations? And do we need to, retweak our assessment slightly to update it? So that's kind of the goal. I mean, our overall goal is 100 cities in a decade. We're now up to 15, so we've got a long way to go. But we've been talking to some entities about possibly actually institutionalizing this in a big way. so that it's not just the handful of our team doing this.
Thank you, Sally. And I'll take this opportunity at this point to thank you for joining us today. And we look forward for the materials that you're going to send me so I can pass on to Anna to send to the group. So once again, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you all. Thank you, Liz, for including me, and thank everyone for their interest. But most importantly, thank you for your work in this area. I mean, this is the future. We have to make sure we have climate adaptation resilience, particularly built into your communities, and ecosystem-based management and adaptation is really key to success. So have a great weekend, everybody. Good luck on your tests, and we'll see you again when I come down to visit. Take care.
All right, thank you, Sally. All right, so I think because we have a time constraint today, we're going to be moving on fairly quickly and getting into, because I think our next presentation is at what time?
11:30.
11:30, and that is an hour from now. So let's just go straight into our session. So let me just share my screen again. Okay, for those of you who just came in, or who came in a short while ago before the morning's introduction, we will be focusing on two modules today. Module 4, which is the practical applications of EbA in urban planning and design. You would recall that when we did module 2, we mentioned a lot of these, you know, your urban forests, your terraces and slopes, etc. So, right? So today we're going to be looking at urban forests, urban farming. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my slides. Urban forests, urban farming, open green spaces, building solutions, green corridors, natural inland wetlands, mangrove forests, amongst others. We probably spend less time on mangrove forests and natural inland wetlands, because I think we discussed the benefits of those, how they're utilized, or how they're part of this ecosystem-based adaptation that we have been referring to. So what are we going to focus on today? Just the different types of EBAs that are out there, how they're applicable to Jamaica in urban and peri-urban areas, and you would help us with that. The function of each of these EBA types, the benefits, the opportunities they provide, the natural processes that each of these EBA types support, some of the cost consideration, and to visualize each of these EBA types, which is a lot of what we're going to be looking at today. What does it actually look like? So if we can see it, can we incorporate it somewhere in Jamaica, in some urban or peri-urban space? So the first one we're going to look at is urban forests. And I am assuming that most persons are very familiar with what an urban forest is. Am I clear? Am I,
Yes.
yeah?
Yes.
So we know that urban forests are, they are these complex systems, right? But they're quite remarkable. They are located within our cities or at the sort of urban-rural interface. Anyone wants to add anything about urban forests? Are there any urban forests here in Kingston? And they may include a range of, for example, as you see on the slide, they include trees in yards, along streets, corridors in protected areas, in watersheds. All right. In fact, in many cities around the world, these forests are the most extensive, functional, and visible form of green infrastructure in cities. And of course, they carry with them many functions. Does anyone want to share any of those, from air pollution regulation, soil pollution regulation, landslide regulation? They encourage biodiversity, there is heat regulation, flood prevention, etc. Anything
What
else?
about food security?
What about what?
Food security. They encourage or promote food security. If cash crops are grown in some of these urban forests, for instance.
Right, because some of your trees could actually be fruit trees, and fruit and food trees. So yes, it will encourage food security, or it will contribute to food security, and it can also contribute to livelihoods and income generation for certain groups in your cities. So yes, beyond the things like slowing runoff and soil stabilization, and of course, if you have that, if you are slowing runoff, for example, in your city, the complementary benefit would be protecting the infrastructure and buildings from flooding, from damage. I mean, we see, for example, here in Kingston and in many parts of Jamaica, in many of the urban areas, what happens to our cities or to our urban areas during flooding. Now, key to these urban forests is this whole notion of the urban heat island, right? And mitigating the urban heat island, as well as air pollution, and reducing the amount of stormwater that ends up on our streets. Any comments, questions?
Yes, please. All right, so for urban forest, I was just wondering, isn't there a size or in terms of our even tree cover, percentage tree cover, you know, something that, you know, can clearly state that, you know, a urban forest must have, you know, a particular size, in terms of how much coverage it offer? Because reading those, it just seems like any site that has just a couple trees can be considered an urban forest. So I would want to know if, you know, would be that, you know, it have to be of a certain cover or a particular size. Because
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
right, because I would just say Emancipation Park. It's a park with trees, but would it be considered an urban forest?
But remember, the urban forest will be the full network, right? So what we said earlier, let me just go back to what we said earlier, it encompasses the trees and shrubs in an urban area. So if we think of this particular visualization of an urban forest here, I mean, Emancipation Park would just be around number 3, right? Where number 3 is on the screen. It will just be a park with a forest, so with trees, but it's really the collective of all of those trees. Now, how do we know if we have an urban forest? And before I answer that question, I saw Adrian's hand up. Adrian, your hand was up.
Yes, I wanted to know where Jamaica is concerned. Is there any policy agenda or policy to support, even if it's being discussed as an idea with any of the agencies or ministry as to the promotion of urban forests? I know there's policies and there's a lot of talk surrounding urban green spaces, but regarding urban forests, is there any policy agenda that supports such or any discussions, even at the conceptualization stage, supporting such?
Okay.
At this point.
Okay, so two questions, and I know that forestry department is doing a lot of stuff with respect to forestry, and I'm gonna yield to Chinar if you have any information on that, but I do believe forestry department is pushing this whole notion of urban forests.
All right, noted.
Go ahead. Chanel?
Oh, yeah, expect. And I didn't quite hear what the question that Adrian asked.
Okay,
All
so
right.
he was wondering if there was any policy position, any policy that is pushing for, I mean, in a nutshell, for urban forestry. Can we identify anything? So my quick response to that was that I knew that there was a lot of stuff happening at the forestry department, and there is this thrust to grow more trees, etc.
Yes, there is in terms of particular to really planting trees along our highways and areas in the city. There is really a thrust to do so. The particular program, I don't know if anyone else here that there's a program, but I'm not remembering it right now. I could get that information and provide it. If there is no one here that really know. I'm not sure if Dion Brown is here. That I'm not sure that if she know the program, she can just let it be known.
I know there is this 1 million trees by 2030 or something like
Yeah,
that.
that is the 3 in 3, but that is island wide, you know. It have to do with somewhat in the urban areas as well. But that is really island wide to plant 3 million trees in 3 years.
Just to chime in, it's not actually a program, but what has been happening is that there has been a series of projects which there are components of the project which is geared towards planting in urban areas. So yes, that's what the department is currently doing at the moment.
Okay, but if we were to think of an urban forest, and I want us to look at the benefits of an urban forest to answer the other Adrian's question, Adrian Henriquez's question, where you're asking what would be the size, what would constitute an urban forest? And I want us to think about that question. If we think about Kingston and we think about Montego Bay, how could we determine what that urban forest would be or what the size would be? What would be some of the first things that we need to look at? What do we have issues in Kingston as it relates? So let's look at the functions of the urban forest. And could we safely say that whatever we have in place mitigates all of these functions?
Not all.
Do we see in Kingston, let's use Kingston as the example for now. Do we see limited flooding? Do we see, like flood regulation? Is Kingston getting hotter, for example? What are we seeing? Can we safely say that with the trees that we have around Kingston in parks, in communities, along roadways are providing the functions of an urban forest? Can we say that? Adrian?
I just wanted to answer the question by saying lesser so now than in the 1990s, having grown up in Kingston myself. I'm seeing based on having gone to school downtown on Duke Street, there are far less trees that I've noticed as a child versus Kingston of today. And the temperature is also reflecting such. The amount of flooding over
there are far less trees. Hold on, there are far less trees when? Now or then?
Now.
Oh, okay.
There are far less trees now than then. And there are been a lot more flooding. Even if I think about like Duke Street where I went to school on, I've seen a lot more water running, even though there have been more trees on that street more specifically. because there were the trees on that road was planted when I was going to primary school. But further up, like ERA Circle, there were far more trees when I was a younger person, even in the ERA Circle area. And I'm seeing a lot more water coming down that street every time I pass when there's rain. So I could say in the 90s, a lot more of this was being serviced by our urban forestry than today in 2023.
Okay, and then I saw another hand up. Whose hand was that? Noel? So can we?
No, I just came back in. I was kicked out, network problem.
Oh, okay, okay. So if we were, what would be the sort of methodology to determine the extent to which, if, for example, we do have an urban forest, or what would an urban forest constitute? So can we look back and see what we had before? Now we're having higher levels of development. Are we reducing the capacity of the amount of trees, etc., the amount of vegetation, etc., to carry out functions such as flood control? So what would we need to do? How would we, because the trees and the forest will now become a network as well. So I don't think it's about just planting trees everywhere either, but determining how much do we need within the size of the city? What have we lost over the last 20 years? What can we put back? What are we seeing as a result of what we have lost? So I don't think there is an absolute figure to say that 20% of your city should be urban forest, but I think it's more looking at it within balancing it with the development you have and ensuring that you retain certain functions. If we're going to have more concrete, how can we reduce this heat island effect? What do we do and how do we need to do that? So I know our folk from NEPA were saying that, you know, I think on the first day that there are attempts to ensure that these townhouse complexes, not townhouses, these apartment buildings that are going up, there are trees around them, but you pass these apartment buildings and you say, but where is the tree going to go? Is it going to be one tree for this mass of concrete that is going to be there? So are we compensating, for example, for the heat island effect with the planting of trees? Are we designing the city that way, or are we just looking at, yes, we can approve an apartment complex here, we can approve one there, we can approve, without looking at the overall spatial area and the design of the city and what are the requirements as it relates to flood regulation, heat regulation, biodiversity conservation, air pollution regulation, etc. I don't know if that is sort of getting to the kind of response you're looking for, Adrian Henriquez. I see Roseanne hand is up. Rose, sorry, not Roseanne.
Oh yes, I wanted to add that I believe that we have not done enough. We have tried, but we have not done enough as it relates to keeping and maintaining the urban forests. I know that there are conditions which require persons to plant trees, especially when they're doing constructions and so on. But I see that a lot of our trees, people just go and arbitrarily just cut them down like that. And there are some really effects of that. For example, near to my office, there was a building and there were trees on a property that was sold. It's right near to the Glen Vincent Clinic, and they removed all the trees from that property. And as a result of that, the poor birds, they lost their habitat. And all the birds, we used to have few birds coming on the building at the ministry. Now all the birds are at the ministry and they're wreaking havoc. And I know that it was as a result of them removing the trees from the property near Glen Vincent, because I always go and watch those birds. And the evening I went back after work to the location, and I saw the birds returning. And when they came and didn't see the tree to land, they were spinning in the air, just kept spinning in a circle, a whole lot of birds spinning in the air. So now they're occupying the building where we are, the roof, and they mess it up and all of that. But what I'm saying is that we have to recognize that, or we have to take charge of this thing. From my side, we just need to try and have like the tree preservation order, ensure that it's up to date and that persons, the parish council, that they implement these orders, because we need to preserve trees. Yes, we have initiatives where we plant the trees, and even that is a problem, because after planting, I don't know if they go back and maintain and water, because they will plant these trees and then you see them this minute and the next couple months, no tree, the trees disappear. So it's, we need, it's not just forestry, but we need to collaborate between all the agencies, ministries, and municipal corporations in our efforts to deal with this issue.
Thank you, Ruthann. And Parisha, I was reading all your comments, but happy that your hand is up so you can speak to them.
Hi there. Good day, everyone. Sure, I'll just elaborate a little bit on that. So my comments were on the basis of respecting the experts that we do have in Jamaica. We have architects, we have urban planners, we have various agencies that have received policy documents and guidance from our experts. But sometimes when it comes down to the client or end user or developers, they ignore the expert advice and so make decisions that do not have the bigger picture in mind. So assessment like plot area ratio, before you even start the design of a building, how much green do you need on this site? It's not just an arbitrary number. It is a recommendation based on the larger urban planning issues. And so if we ignore those, then we have the problems of removing trees in areas where assessments were done of flora and fauna and things like that, and not understanding the implications of removing that. NEPA has laws about what trees you can cut and not cut. And if we ignore those laws, there will be implications to the environment. And that's what we're facing in Kingston right now. Because we're ignoring our experts. Yes, people will complain that it is expensive, but it will be more expensive to mitigate and try to fix the problems that we create by ignoring those recommendations.
And yes, and that is true, because you have to include this notion. I mean, but do we have this notion of urban forests included anywhere? For example, in any policy document that, you know, this is something that we're going to do? Is it in Vision 2030? Is it going forward in your MTF, in your medium-term framework, that this notion of urban forests is something that we're going to pursue? Is it within your development orders? Is it within development, what you call it, the municipal council's development plans? Where?
No. Right. I mean, so maybe some experts are here that could speak to that, but I know from a design perspective, we're guided by the Sustainable Development Goals, and then we try to apply that to adaptation documents that are being developed in Jamaica. Sometimes those documents take time to be released, so some professionals have to be working with draft documents that haven't even been gazetted as yet, but we just have the ethical, drive to say, let's implement it, even though it's not law as yet. But maybe we have some experts in the class who can speak to that in terms of what documents have been put into law for Jamaica versus
just into policy, I mean, have we, and it goes back to Adrian's question, how much, what is the space that we need for these, or not a space, the size, what denotes an urban forest? And if we were to take an aerial view of Kingston, for example, would we see something like this emerging? I mean, you drive in Kingston 8 now, and if you look up on the mountains from a distance, there are a lot of townhouses, apartment complexes going up on the mountain. I mean, are we replacing the forest with those?
Yes.
You know, what are we doing? So I see Cheryl's hand up.
Building keep.
Cheryl?
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. Just a thought for consideration where the conversation we're having is that to strengthen the discussion or to more or less cause some kind of ban, I think we need information because similarly, we had some discussions earlier. But for some things, we probably looking at urban forests can identify areas that we can measure the effect of having or the effect of loss, and as opposed possibly urban heat effect. Basically, we would need to have in certain zones. I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm thinking along the right line, where data can be collected as to how hot or how cool somewhere is, depending on the trees that are there. In our own local setting, I know it applies in other places, but if we can generate that kind of data and to encourage and then to apply that in other cases for persons to recognize the kind of impact it will have even on them remaining cool, whether during the day or at nights, is possibly some of the information we need to develop for ourselves that we can rightly say when we have reached a critical point or where we are at an acceptable level of the amount or the amount of tree cover that we have in a particular zone. But with the lack of information, I am not so sure how strong our argument would be received when those recommendations are made.
Right, but we have to, obviously, I mean, you need data to determine what is the extent of tree cover in your city. The truth is, it may not be a hard assessment, because if you were to survey what your city looked like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, what it looked like 10 years ago and what it looks like today, you may see differences in terms of tree cover, etc. I mean, I'm sure you will see differences, and it's not necessarily going to be positive differences. The idea is it's not about stopping development, but it's about ensuring that your development, that you know, your gray development or your gray infrastructure doesn't distort your ability to continuously receive services from the natural environment, which the city needs. So we do need things as it relates to reducing stormwater runoff, reducing flooding. We would welcome things as it relates to reducing this heat island effect, because we're seeing, I mean, when you look in geography books, what is Kingston's average temperature? What was it supposed to be? If we think back to school, what was the temperature in Jamaica? What was it normally? 25, 26, wasn't it? Things like that. Sometimes when you go to a car and you turn it on and it tells you the temperature outside, you're seeing things like 34, 35 degrees. So there are changes, and we are also seeing some of those changes in terms of infrastructure. So whilst we're going up in terms of infrastructure, and I think it's increasing, what is it? It's reducing, what is the density thing? I always mix it up. We're going up, we're also at the same time reducing the amount of vegetation cover that we have or that we had before these new developments. And the question is, do our strategic documents have that kind of information requiring or saying that we are going to be pursuing these? Are we just planting trees because we want to plant 1 million trees? What is underlying all of that? Is it going to be in some way where we can say at the end of planting all of these trees, we're going to have a network of trees that's going to contribute to this, that is going to contribute to urban forestry, etc. So that's the idea. I mean, the idea is to really assess, know what exists, and it would appear based on the persons that are here, we are not even sure if we can say, well, do we have a degraded urban forest? Do we have a good urban forest? We can assume that we don't have a good one because we are seeing the increasing incidence of things like flooding. We may be experiencing increased heat in Kingston and in some of our communities. Carisha, your hand is up as well. So.
Hi, yes, so I could suggest that, so I know that we have approximately 5 registered landscape architects in Jamaica, but that information, maybe it's not in public sector, but it might be useful to reach out to the various institutes like the Jamaican Institute of Architects, the University of Technology Jamaica, which teaches aspects of landscape architecture and aspects of that which they would have in their research documents, but it's not like public knowledge to say, put it out there. We have a database that any consultant can just pull up and get that information. But the information is there. We just don't have it at our fingertips, which is unfortunate, right?
Okay. Thank you for that. And I do know that, I mean, I can't tell you, I mean, I don't know if we have, I think there is an updated forestry policy. I don't know if that is included, if urban forest is included in there, but I think Tanya would be able to tell you some of that. I know specifically because I did ask if Vision 2030, for example, the new medium-term policy framework, the MTF, if it takes into account or it includes ecosystem-based adaptation, or it mentions it specifically. No, it does not. So the most recent one for 2021 to 2024 does not. And as many of you would know, I was part of that Vision 2030. And whilst we speak about ecosystem services, the words EbA are not included in the National Development Plan, but the opportunity to would have been in the MTF, which again would filter into other sectoral plans and so on. So there are opportunities to do it. I know we all know the importance of trees, but this is just a graphic here to share with you, you know, at the individual level, this is what it does. At the street level, this is what it can do. And at the city level, this is what it can do. So I think we ought to, I mean, a lot of what the forestry department is doing now in terms of its thrust in tree planting ought to be commended, because what it's trying to do is to create the environment so that every single space where there is an opportunity for tree planting can actually get trees. I mean, so we see a lot happening in the schools and in communities, etc. And this, of course, is just a graphic to say what are the processes that we see that can be supported by this whole notion of urban forest. So the fact is, these are facts here. Are we in Jamaica or in our urban centers benefiting at an optimum level from these services that urban forests provide? So without the data, without the information, can we say that we're benefiting from these services? Sorry. Anybody? Yes, no, don't know. So we can ask ourselves, in our cities, do we have clean air?
To an extent.
Do we have shade? Simple things. You know, are we seeing a cooling effect? I mean, do we feel cool? Are we getting hotter when we go out there in you know, when we're walking from just the car to the supermarket? You know, we're in the car park and we're walking from the car park into the supermarket. Is it hotter than normal? Carisha, your hand is up again. Now, one of the things that I don't have it here, but one of the things that is important as we look at some of these EBAs and the solutions is things like cost considerations. What do you think would be the cost consideration for urban forests? If we think of cost considerations, if we want to look at urban forestry, would we also have to look at things like land access? Would that be a cost? Construction, implementation. You guys have been saying it for the entire course, the whole notion of maintenance. So if we want to look at opportunities for urban forestry, beyond planting trees at specific locations, we also need to look at access and ownership of lands that may exist that we could plant trees as well, outside of, you know, the landscaping and so on in buildings, etc., and creating parks on government-owned lands. But we could also look at, you know, the cost as it relates to ownership of land, the cost that it relates as well to include, you know, what's the cost of the trees, the inventories, what are the costs of just clearing a space to get this reforestation happening in urban areas. So land-related costs, if we think of urban forestry, and we have a strategy in place for urban forestry, and we're going to go at it, forestry department, beyond the existing spaces, we may be looking at costs related to land acquisition, so paying land owners, but we may also be looking at costs as it relates to the actual forestry. We may be looking at maintenance costs. I mean, what are the costs of training and capacity building to maintain these urban forests? What are the costs of monitoring the inventory? What are the costs of, you know, there is a notion of tree mortality. So, and I think we have been discussing that a little bit, so it's been mentioned a lot that due to poor maintenance, we may have high levels of tree mortality in and around some of the different not areas, but like some around the different buildings where they're required to have trees, but over time you don't see any. That of course focuses, I mean, it's sort of like tree mortality, and as a result of limited or no maintenance, you have prices related to pruning, tree disposal when needed, tree litter management, etc. So there are costs related to urban forestry that must be taken into account as well, as we get into this whole notion of looking at urban forests. There is a case study here, but I wanted you to look at the case study as well as to share with us how you think urban forests can be applied to urban and peri-urban areas in the Jamaican context. Where do you see the opportunities to begin to plant more trees? What are some specific examples that you may have? So my example would be around, you know, where we make pavements bigger, so we could have tree-lined pavements. Is that possible? Is that realistic in Kingston? I think there is one place that I see that, and that is on Knutsford Boulevard. Part of Knutsford Boulevard, just after CIBC. There are a lot of, it's like, it's just a little tree-lined space, but it's sort of in front of that Victoria Mutual building. Can we get more of that in Kingston? What would it take to get more of that? Because we have already built our roads to accommodate very small and very narrow and very concrete sidewalks. So where else would you see applications for the notion of urban forestry? Carisha, anybody else? Nobody's speaking today? 2 persons raise your hands. I have Adrian and Carisha. We need other people to speak, but go ahead.
Where can the plant trees?
Who is this?
Trees, McCann.
Either Carisha or Adrian, both your hands are up. Anyone can go. Adrian, your hand is up.
Okay, so I was thinking something that you said earlier in terms of access to land. I know that there are a lot of abandoned buildings that have not been occupied for decades downtown. And I'm quite sure the land tax might be owed on some of them. Maybe some of those areas can be converted into green spaces. Some of those buildings have been knocked down, especially close to that Tesco gas station, and been converted into things like parking lots. So maybe persons have bought out those lots. So maybe if they could be encouraged to put in some trees on some of those parking lots to help cover even some of the cars. Because I remember, like, I think a couple of years ago, my baby was left in a car and suffocated to death in the heat. So it could provide us with some of those reduction of heat services in like parking lot areas.
Okay, so we're looking at parking lots. Can be an example. I see Carisha, your hand is up too.
We could also look at blue roofs, which is basically, converting the roof surface into planting networks, as well as
Converting what?
converting the surface of the roof into a planting network. So that helps with absorption and collection of water, but it also adds to that urban forest network that can be created. You would need to engage a specialist for that. Similarly, you can do the same on the facade where you have vertical gardens.
But those are more like urban farming, yeah?
Right,
So
but it would not be
form,
yeah.
they would form an urban forest per se. Because
Well,
urban forest, the focus is on trees. But urban
just trees.
farming, what you're talking about, which is what we're going to do next, to take into account all of that. I have a case study that I will read to you. There is one on the what you call that, the screen, but there is another one I have. But Dion, go ahead.
Just to add to what you had mentioned earlier in terms of planting like along roadways, another option, and the department has been doing this through a series of projects, is also doing plantings in institutions that has larger compounds, for example, such as schools. So those are some areas that could also be considered when it comes on to urban.
Right, and as you do your schools, the issue of maintenance would be sort of, let's say, cheap, because if you connect it to the environmental clubs and the 4-H clubs at schools, you know, you would have persons readily maintaining, etc., if you know what I mean. And of course, you do have your groundsmen and so on at schools who would actually do that. So those are, and as well as institutions, I mean, around public sector institutions and even private sector institutions where there are opportunities to do so, I think those opportunities should be explored. Rose, thanks, Dion. Rose?
You mentioned which is a public institution, but there are also communities.
Can you repeat that, what you said?
No, you mentioned the public places, public institutions, but I want also share that there are many communities now with open areas that they can utilize these areas. For example, in the Seaview area, I've seen vast areas that can be used. Back over in the extended area now, in Portmore, there are some areas like that. And for the new communities that are being built or new towns, we should push for some of those. For example, that big new town coming over in, oh Lord, where the cane lands were. What's it? Oh Lord, I don't remember the name, but it's being developed now into a new town. But I am specifically now highlighting that there are spaces in communities now that are available that can be utilized. And I know definitely there is some in Seaview, Burbank. I can't remember those offhand, but we can look for those areas.
And if you look at the example I have on screen, which is the location is Toronto, where they recognize the value of urban forests and is focusing on increasing its tree canopy cover to about 40% of what exists. So towards maximizing the potential for ecological, social, and economic benefits of urban trees. So the forestry branch of the Parks, Forestry and Recreation Division maintains over 4 million trees on public property and works with local groups and residents to expand and improve the urban forests throughout the city. Since 2013, the city has been planting approximately 100,000 trees on public lands, parks, streets, ravines per year, with ambitions to increase that to 300,000 per year through private-public partnerships with private landowners. So we're focusing a lot, similar to Toronto. The forestry department has been doing a lot of this. The question is it enough? Should we be doing some more? But what is the, outside of the forestry department, what is the bigger vision for urban forests in the Jamaican context? And the words that we speak, you know, we talk about encouraging people, but when you're talking about the development of a country and you're talking about sustainable development ambitions, it's not enough to encourage. Where is it within a policy framework? Where is it within our spatial planning framework? You know, how much as a country, what is the vision for each city in terms of urban forestry? What have we lost? And it goes back, I think, whose point it is about data with Cheryl. It goes back to data. What have we lost? What has been the implications of that loss over the last 20 years? And what do we need to do to make a change to win back some of the benefits that urban forests provide without losing that thrust for development and for housing? And how do we create an environment where both can coexist? All right. Carisha, is that a new hand or old hand? Is that an old hand? I do have another example here.
That wasn't, sorry, that was to add to the other point, but I already put it in the chat. So on the roof, it would be an intensive system. So the small trees can be added, but no greater than 1 meter. And typical examples are in Singapore, where they have policy documents for that. I don't know if it still applies to that category.
Okay. But we can look at it as we go on. Not a problem. Thank you. So there's another example I have in here, Freetown, the Tree Town campaign. So Freetown in Sierra Leone, they have launched a campaign called the Tree Town campaign 2020 to 2023. So what it says is, within and surrounding the urban space around the capital, Freetown, trees have given way to buildings, a bleak testament of ongoing deforestation and environmental degradation in Sierra Leone. The Freetown municipality began a 1 million tree planting campaign in 2020. In addition to diverse native tree species with extended canopies and strong roots, private compound and community-based trees include mango trees to provide additional fruit harvesting and community benefits. So this is their, educational workshops, community-based stewardship, planting and growing models, establish ownership and value in the campaign at a community level. So it's not about, for them, it's not about planting trees, it's about growing trees, and it's about ensuring that each one of us is part of a process. So 1 million trees is one city's small ambition to increase the much needed global carbon sink. All right. So that's an example here. We have a few minutes before we go on. So let's go on before our guest speaker comes in. Is she here, Anna? Because I
haven't seen her yet.
Okay. So urban farming is a way for people to grow crops for personal consumption, to sell locally and beyond locally, I mean, if you have enough. And so it's growing, it's really about urban agriculture, and it's about growing plants and animals within and around cities, producing and delivering a diverse variety of crops, of agricultural crops. And it's really an incentive. One of the things about urban farming, if done properly, it could actually increase food security for several urban livelihoods. And on the screen, you actually see how it can be applied, or how it's visualized. It can be visualized in several, I mean, there are several different ways in which we could apply urban farming. As it says on the slide, the most important incentive is to increase food security for urban households. So there are various types of urban farming, and of course there are several benefits, but let's look at the types. I'm sure we've heard about things like raised beds, for example. We have shipping container farms, we have backyard gardens. Anybody familiar with any? We have the rooftop gardens that we've been speaking about, vertical farming, hydroponics, amphibious farming, aquaponics. Anybody wants to share their experience with any of these types of urban farming techniques? Anybody familiar with a raised bed? Raised beds are also used, for example, within traditional farming, where you include a new structure above the particular space because maybe the soil quality is poor. In some countries that do not benefit from the type of soil quality that Jamaica has, they would do things like raised beds. Anybody familiar with any of these and how they can be applied? Nobody? No hands?
In my backyard.
Anybody has any of these?
Only backyard gardening. That's
Right,
nothing
the
more.
most common one, or backyard garden, planting on
What
your
I
own
do.
property. Do we have communities, for example, that has networks of backyard gardens?
Yes, there are communities in Mavis Bank and areas in Gordon Town, East Rural St. Andrew, Augustone as well. They do farming and then feed that into the larger population through guidance of their community organizations or members of parliament, etc. Or yeah.
How many people have little boxes that they plant stuff in? Like maybe if it's just, you know, your peppermint or your rosemary or your little herb gardens, which are just really tiny applications that you could put anywhere.
So it's like a community farmers association, and they have membership. So I'm not sure of the numbers, like how many members of the community are part of their association.
Oh no, I wasn't asking that, sorry.
Okay.
I was asking how many persons in here are applying any of these types of techniques. Like, you know, how many people have, you know, in here would have a backyard garden, or how many people, you know, even if you have, you know, these little box gardens, because that's not here, for example, but you have little box gardens where you could plant small things in. How many people have those?
I have.
Sorry, go ahead. Who was speaking? Howard.
I do my little gardening in paint pans and big bucket pans, and I plant around the yard. But one problem I have is that my neighbor goats eat off all of my stuff. That's my big problem. I plant every little thing, but I have to be wrestling with the goats.
And I
Okay.
do that too. I do the same in the backyard, and I have my raised bed. Do my tomatoes. I get a lot of stuff. I plant pumpkin. I do my gungo peas, sorrel, different things.
Anybody else? I see Adrian hand is up.
Yeah, I used to do it, but then what I did was to plant trees in front of this open space in front of my house. And even just the other day, my mother called and said our neighbors got like ackee and mango off the trees still to this day, so they're still there. So even though I'm not there anymore to do it, as soon as I come back, I'm going right back to my urban gardening.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So there are different techniques. We have backyard gardens, rooftop gardens. I think many of you understand what those are. We have vertical farming. A lot of persons have been speaking about that throughout, not just today's class, but several classes. We have hydroponics, amphibious farming, and aquaponics. What I'm going to do now is I believe our guest speaker is here. So we will come back to this and go through the different types of urban farming. And what we need to realize is that urban farming, we could also look at it at the individual level and then look at it cumulatively. How when we sum up everything across, how many of our households are doing some form of urban gardening? And we could also look at it within the construct of the wider community, from a community perspective. And I think this is what Carisha was speaking about, how communities are coming together to do this. And then, of course, we do have some amount of vertical farming and rooftop gardens, providing on buildings, as well as on buildings. We're going to look a little bit at hydroponics and amphibious farming. And then we're going to look at the sort of cost requirements for these as well.